You know, it's funny. You drive past them every single day. Probably don't even give them a second glance. I'm talking about utility poles. Just kind of right there. Right. But here's the thing. These ordinary looking structures, they're actually ground zero for this huge, really complicated, and honestly pretty intense infrastructure battle happening right now all across the country. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into what some are calling the joint use crisis. Picture this. You've got a massive influx of federal cash, unprecedented demand from new technologies, and then you throw in climate change pressures. It's like a perfect storm brewing around, believe it or not, 130 million utility poles. And look, this isn't just some, niche industry problem. The ripple effects are huge. We're talking delays costing the U.S. economy over $22 billion every year, just in lost benefits. So our mission today is to really unpack all of this. We want to dig into why these poles are suddenly so critical for, well, everything, our internet, our safety, even our economic future. Okay, so trying to get a handle on this, where do we even start? For me, the amount of federal money involved just seems massive. That has to be a major part of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's foundational. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, particularly that huge $42.5 billion broadband program, it's basically forced the biggest overhaul of joint use regulations, well, ever. We're talking about fundamental changes to how things get built on these poles.
Okay, and the centerpiece of that is it that FCC order from late 2023?
Exactly. The fourth report and order, it kicks in July 25th, 2024. And it's the most significant pole attachment reform we've seen in, over a decade.
So what's the practical effect? What does it actually do about these delays everyone talks about?
Well, a big piece is this new thing called the Rapid Broadband Assessment Team, or RBAT. They actually modeled it after a successful program up in Maine.
Okay.
And the goal, the target, is to get disputes resolved in 60 days. Which, sounds maybe not super fast, but compare that to the old way, 180 days, sometimes even longer.
Wow, yeah, that's a huge cut, like two-thirds faster.
Yes, exactly. A 67% reduction. And that directly targets those delays that cost the economy, somewhere between $500 million and almost $2 billion a month.
Just staggering numbers.
Yeah. And you're already seeing states, Pennsylvania, New York, Kentucky, Connecticut, they're jumping on board, passing their own rules to match that speed.
Okay, speed is one thing, but what about the cost? Getting poles ready, the make-ready work, that's always been a bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Expensive.
Right, and that's the other major change. They've redefined how costs work for red-tagged poles.
Red-tagged, meaning?
Meaning the utility already planned to replace that pole anyway. Maybe it's old, unsafe, doesn't meet their standards, whatever. Before, they could still charge the new company attaching broadband for that replacement.
Ah, okay, so the new guys had to pay, even if the pole was basically condemned already.
Pretty much. But the new rules say, nope. If it's red tagged for the utilities reasons, the new attacher doesn't foot that bill. And that's a huge cost saving, especially in rural areas.
How huge are we talking?
Well, rural projects report something like 1 in every 12 poles needs replacing. And each replacement, materials, labor, everything, it's like $2,500 to maybe $5,600 per pole. So, yeah, this change saves deployers a ton of money. It shifts the cost back where it arguably belongs.
And behind all these rule changes, it feels like there's this, almost artificial urgency. Like that BEAD program, the $42.5 billion broadband money, is really pushing the timeline.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's created immense pressure. States have just 365 days to pick their projects, and then only 4 years to get everything built.
4 years for massive infrastructure projects.
Yeah. It's forced them to use emergency rules, streamline approvals. Stuff that normally takes years is happening in months. It's a completely compressed timeline, really unprecedented.
Okay, so the money's flowing, the rules are changing to speed things up. Sounds like it's suddenly prime time for pole space. Is everyone just scrambling to get a spot now with all this new tech?
That's exactly it. A scramble is a good word for it. You've got 5G rolling out and this massive fiber expansion happening simultaneously. The demand for space on these poles is unlike anything we've ever seen in telecom history.
It's like convergence.
Precisely. And these poles, they just weren't designed for this level of, crowding.
Let's talk 5G first. How much pressure is that adding?
Okay, so numbers first. As of this year, 2024, maybe 175,000 small cells deployed across the country. Small cells are those smaller antennas for 5G.
Right.
But the mobile carriers, They expect to deploy 10 times more small cells than the big traditional cell towers over the next 5 years.
10 times? Why so many?
It's the physics, basically.
Yeah.
5G, especially the faster versions, uses higher frequencies. Those signals don't travel as far and get blocked easily, so you need antennas much closer together, like every 200 to 400 feet in cities.
Wow. Okay, so that dense, almost line of sight needed.
Pretty much, for the really high-speed stuff. Take Dish Wireless, just one company. They put up over 17,000 5G sites between 2021 and 2024, and they need thousands more just to meet deadlines next year in 2025.
And each one needs a spot on a pole.
Needs a spot, needs power, and critically needs a fiber optic cable running to it for backhaul to connect it to the main network. So it's not just space, it's power and fiber too. It really strains the whole system.
Okay, so that's 5G. Then you mentioned fiber expansion too.
Yeah, that's the other huge piece. You've got over $52 billion combined from the BEAD program and the Capital Projects Fund, specifically for building out fiber broadband.
And a lot of that goes on poles.
A lot of it.
Yep.
Especially in areas where burying cable is too expensive or difficult. They use these special cables, ADSS, all-dielectric self-supporting. They're designed to be safe near power lines.
Okay.
But the rules for how you attach them, maintaining that non-metallic separation from power, it dictates specific configurations that actually end up using a surprising amount of that limited pole real estate.
So it's not just like hang a cable anywhere. It's very specific, and it eats up space. Which brings us to the pole itself. How much usable space is actually on one of these things?
Right, the physical limits. If you look at the safety code, the NESC, a standard utility pole gives you about 13.5 feet of usable space, roughly.
That doesn't sound like a lot when you think about everything trying to get on there.
It's not. And within that space, you absolutely need a minimum of 40 inches that's critical between the power lines at the top and the communication lines below.
The safety zone.
Exactly. Now, the FCC kind of assumes each attachment takes about a foot of space. But these new complex installations, like the 5G gear, they often need more than that.
And the poles themselves need to be stronger sometimes, right?
Yeah, for sure. 5G equipment often needs what they call Class 2 or stronger poles, basically. Poles that can handle more weight and wind load, which means frequently you have to replace the existing pole entirely.
Another cost.
And a big one. That pole replacement alone can add up to 25% to the total cost of that part of the project.
So, okay, limited space, specific requirements. I'm guessing the competition for the best pole locations must be fierce. Does it differ between, say, cities and rural areas?
Oh, absolutely. Very different challenges. In cities, especially dense urban areas, it's all about line of sight for those super fast millimeter-wave 5G signals. Buildings, trees, everything can block them. So finding a pole with a clear shot, that limits your options drastically.
Okay, so location is everything in the city. What about rural?
Rural areas, the challenge is different. The poles are much farther apart, maybe 300 feet on average, compared to 125 feet in the city.
Right.
Longer spans mean the cables pull with more tension, creating higher structural loads on the poles. So not every pole might be strong enough or have the capacity for another heavy attachment. Again, it limits your choices.
So bottom line, whether it's city or country, you've got this capacity crunch.
Pretty much nationwide, yeah. The existing infrastructure just wasn't built for this level of demand. It's a real crisis without massive coordinated upgrades.
Okay, so coordination, or the lack of it. What does that actually cost us? Beyond just the price of replacing a pole. We're talking hidden economic losses now, right?
Yeah, and the numbers are, frankly, pretty shocking. Research shows that just the delays in getting broadband deployed cost the U.S. economy somewhere between $491 million and $1.86 billion every single month.
Every month.
Every month.
Yeah.
In lost economic gains. Add that up over a year, and you're looking at over $22 billion in benefits that we're just leaving on the table because we can't get this stuff built fast enough.
So for you, our listener, just think about that. Billions lost, not just dollars, but missed opportunities for businesses, for remote work, for education. It's like this hidden tax on progress because the coordination isn't there. What's causing these breakdowns?
It really comes down to some pretty basic but deep-seated problems. A lot of utilities, believe it or not, are still using really old systems to track what's on their poles. Sometimes paper records, maybe spreadsheets if they're lucky.
Seriously?
Yeah. It creates these information silos. Different departments, different companies, they just don't have a clear picture of what's actually out there. Makes joint planning almost impossible.
And then you get things like bootleg attachments. What's that?
That's basically when someone puts equipment on a pole without permission, without going through the proper process. Estimates are maybe 3% to 6% of poles have these unauthorized attachments.
Wow. So people just sneak stuff onto poles.
Sometimes, yeah. Or records get lost.
Yeah.
It creates huge safety hazards, obviously, and makes future work way more complicated and expensive because you don't know what you're dealing with.
And all this bad record keeping, it leads to overloading poles too, right?
Exactly. You don't know how much weight is really up there. Poles get loaded beyond their safe limits, and then you need expensive emergency replacements when they fail or nearly fail, stuff that could have been planned way better.
It sounds like just waiting for something to go wrong, and I assume this directly hits those make-ready costs we talked about, the cost to prepare a pole.
Directly and significantly. Standard make-ready, maybe $500 to $3,000 a pole, roughly. But you get into these complex situations with poor records, lots of existing attachments. Those costs can just explode.
Like how much?
Well, we've seen reports from major rural projects where make-ready costs jumped from maybe $30,000 a mile to $90,000 a mile. Just because the coordination was so bad or the existing infrastructure was such a mess.
$90,000 a mile just to get the poles ready.
Yeah. And remember that figure about pole replacements adding 25% to project costs? A lot of that is driven by these coordination failures and unexpected capacity issues. It's a massive drain.
And the way companies pay to attach to poles, the rates, that seems to make things worse, not better. It encourages fighting over space.
It really does. The incentives are all misaligned. You've got investor-owned utilities, the big guys, their rates are regulated by the FCC. Average is, around $6.84 per pole per year? But then you have municipal utilities, owned by cities and electric cooperatives. Their rates often aren't federally regulated. And they charge way more, average around $15.39 for munis, $14.86 for co-ops.
More than double.
Yeah. So what happens? Companies wanting to attach PAR might try to forum shop, basically. Pick the pole owner with the lowest rates if they have a choice. It creates strategic gaming instead of collaboration.
And the utilities charging those lower rates might not have enough money coming in to actually manage the process well.
That's part of the problem, too. They might lack the consistent revenue to invest in modern joint use management systems, better tracking, better coordination. So the problem just continues.
Are we seeing rates go up now to try and cover these costs?
We are, definitely. It's a sign of the pressure. New York munis, for example, just raised their rates 23% this year, up to $16.75. Out in the Pacific Northwest, some utilities went from about $22.45 up to $28 in February 24, and they've already scheduled another jump to $32 for January 25.
Well,
yeah, it shows utilities are trying to recoup these coordination costs through pricing, which, maybe isn't the most efficient way to solve the underlying problem.
So, okay, it's not just about money and delays. These failures, this messiness, it creates actual physical risks for workers, for the public. That feels really critical.
It absolutely is. And safety incidents related to joint use work really highlight these systemic weaknesses. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, their 2024 data shows fall protection is still the #1 violation type over 16,300 violations. That directly relates to the environment crews are working in on these poles.
Yeah, working high up with all that equipment.
Exactly. And even more serious, electrical hazards. They account for around 411 deaths each year in utility-related work. Joint use has complexity, more wires, more companies involved. It just increases the potential for dangerous mistakes.
And you mentioned those ghost poles earlier, the double wood thing?
Right, the double wood or ghost poles. That's a perfect visual example of coordination breakdown. An old pole is supposed to be removed when a new one goes up, but communication fails, and it just stays there, standing right next to the new one.
Like you said, Warren, Ohio has hundreds of them.
Over 300, yeah. It's not just ugly, it's a hazard. Obstruction, potential property damage if it falls. Yeah. It really undermines public confidence, too.
And the other big risk, the pole itself, just failing, collapsing.
That's probably the scariest systematic risk, pole overloading.
Yeah.
Because the tracking is often so poor, poles end up carrying way more weights than they were ever designed for.
And these things are heavy, right?
Oh, yeah. A standard pole can weigh 1,000 pounds or more. When one fails, especially if it causes a cascade, it's catastrophic. There was that incident in Texas, April 2019. Moderate winds, only 50-mile-per-hour, but 26 poles in a row went down.
26.
Undetected decay, internal rot right at the ground line. It just wasn't caught because inspection protocols weren't adequate.
Which brings up inspections.
Yeah.
Are these poles getting checked regularly enough?
Well, the NESC code says they need inspections at such intervals as experience has shown to be necessary, which is a bit vague, honestly. And the reality is many utilities lack really systematic joint use inspection programs. They might check their own stuff, but not necessarily everything on the pole.
And the most common violation found is?
Mid-span clearance violations. That's when the required vertical distance between different wires, or between wires and the ground, isn't maintained. Big safety issue. Potential for contact, shorts.
And what about things like one-touch make-ready? That's supposed to speed things up, right, where one crew does all the prep work?
Right, OTMR. Efficient in theory, letting one qualified crew move all the existing attachments to make room for the new one, instead of multiple crews coming out. But it also means multiple companies' equipment is being handled by a third party, often under tight deadlines. It puts even more pressure on accurate record-keeping and communication. If the initial data about what's on the pole is wrong, or if the work isn't documented perfectly afterwards, it can actually create new problems down the line. More coordination complexity.
Okay, so we have this system that's already creaking under the strain. Coordination issues, safety risks, and then you throw in climate change, accelerating extreme weather. It sounds like a recipe for a disaster.
It really is pushing everything towards a breaking point. Extreme weather is causing failures at rates we haven't seen before. It completely changes the risk calculation. Just look at 2024, 27 separate weather disasters costing $1 billion or more. That's the second highest number since they started tracking in 1980.
And power outages are getting worse.
Significantly.
Right.
The average U.S. resident saw a 16% increase in weather-related outage time between 2013 and 2022. And if you look at the big picture, from 2000 to 2023, 80% of all major power outages were caused by weather. That's over 1,700 events.
Can you give some examples of the damage to poles specifically?
Oh, yeah. The scale is mind-blowing sometimes. Hurricane Michael in 2018 wiped out almost 79% of the utility poles in 8 counties in North Florida.
79%? Almost all of them.
Just gone. Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico took down 80% of their wooden poles. Hurricane Harvey in Texas damaged about 5,000 poles, left almost 220,000 people without power for nearly 2 weeks. It just shows how vulnerable this infrastructure is, especially in high-risk areas.
And are these joint-use poles, the ones crowded with equipment, even more vulnerable?
They are, yeah. All those extra attachments, wires, equipment boxes, they increase the surface area. That means more wind resistance, basically catching the wind like a sail, makes them more likely to snap or get pushed over.
And ice probably does the same thing.
Exactly. Ice load increases the weight and the effects of surface area. Same problem, different cost.
And when these poles go down, the outages can last a long time, right? Affecting people unequally.
That's a huge issue. Looking at major weather outages between 2017 and 2021, at least half lasted more than 12 hours. Over a third went longer than 24 hours. And these long outages, they hit vulnerable communities, the hardest low-income areas, people with medical needs. It's becoming a real environmental justice concern.
And it's not just the storms themselves. Climate change is hurting the poles in slower ways, too, like making them decay faster.
Yes, that's a really critical, often overlooked impact. Wood poles decay mostly right at the ground line, that zone about 6 inches above to 18 inches below ground. You get moisture, oxygen, temperature changes. Perfect conditions for fungi.
Okay.
Climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of those temperature cycles. Freeze-thaw, wet-dry. This actually makes the chemical preservatives leach out of the wood into the soil faster.
So the protection doesn't last as long.
Exactly. The effective service life of a wood pole, which used to be maybe 30 to 50 years, might now be as short as 20 or 25 years in areas with high climate stress. They just don't last like they used to.
Wow. Okay, so if we tie this all together, the crisis, the costs, the safety risks, the climate threat, it sounds incredibly daunting. But is there an upside? Is all this pressure maybe forcing innovation, driving investment?
That's exactly the other side of the coin. It's a crisis, yes, but it's also a massive catalyst for change. The amount of investment pouring into this sector right now is unprecedented. It really signals a fundamental shift in how we build and manage shared infrastructure.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Okay, the global market for utility poles, just the poles themselves, is somewhere between, say, $35 billion and $58 billion this year. And it's projected to grow significantly, maybe hitting $53 billion to $76 billion by around 2030, 2032.
And the U.S. market?
The U.S. piece is projected to reach over $11 billion by 2032. A lot of that is driven by the federal money and the tech demands we've been talking about.
And what about the poles themselves? Are we seeing smarter poles, new kinds of poles?
Oh, absolutely. Smart pole technology is probably the single biggest innovation trend. That market's predicted to explode from about $17 billion this year to over $85 billion by 2031.
$85 billion. What makes a pole smart?
It's about integration.
Yeah.
These aren't just holding wires anymore, they're becoming platforms, integrating IoT sensors for environmental monitoring, maybe air quality sensors, traffic monitoring. EV charging stations are becoming common, integrating 5G small cells directly. It's convergence of utilities, telecom, and smart city tech, all in the same structure.
So the humble utility pole becomes this connected hub, and presumably there's serious money backing this up, both public and private.
Massive amounts. U.S. electric utilities alone, they invested $320 billion in 2023. That's up 12% just from 2003 levels, adjusting for inflation. And investment in the distribution grid, the poles and wires part, hit over $50 billion in 2023. That's a 160% increase since 2003.
And the federal infrastructure bill plays a role.
A huge role. Over $50 billion specifically tagged for climate-resilient infrastructure. A lot of that will go towards replacing old poles, hardening the grid, using better materials.
Better materials, like not just wood.
Right. We're seeing real innovation there. Composite poles, fiberglass reinforced plastic FRP poles. The market for those is expected to hit nearly $240 million by 2030.
And they last longer.
Much longer. They offer maybe a 60 to 80-year service life compared to that shrinking 25, 50 years for wood, maybe even less now. The initial cost is higher, sure, but when you look at the total life cycle cost, especially in areas prone to storms or rapid decay, these advanced materials start to look very attractive.
Makes sense. And the telecom companies must be investing heavily too, given how much they need pole access.
Absolutely. The global market for just telecom network infrastructure was almost $100 billion last year, heading towards maybe $182 billion by 2033. And in the U.S., the wireless industry hit a record $39 billion invested in their networks in 2022. A huge chunk of that relies on getting access to utility poles. It's all interconnected, the investment, the demand, the innovation.
So if we bring it all together then, it really feels like the whole world of utility poles, joint use, construction, it's at this massive turning point. You've got the federal money, the tech transformation, the climate pressure all hitting at once. It's forcing a change, isn't it?
It really is a critical inflection point. And honestly, whether that $42.5 billion federal broadband investment succeeds or fails, it largely depends on whether we can finally fix these coordination problems that have hampered joint use for decades.
So what's needed?
We need solutions that tackle everything at once. The economic incentives need to align, safety protocols need to be robust and enforced, and we need to leverage technology for better tracking and planning. The rule changes from the FCC are a good start, but making them work on the ground will require real collaboration, unprecedented collaboration between utilities and telecom companies that haven't always worked well together.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you, our listener. When you think about how fast technology is changing and how rapidly the climate is shifting, how do you think the evolution of these utility poles might actually reshape our everyday lives, beyond just giving us faster internet? And maybe more importantly, what role should communities play in deciding what this critical infrastructure looks like for the 21st century?